MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy or Molly, is the world's most popular entactogen. Entactogens differ from psychedelics in that they don't have a strong hallucinogenic component, and they also don't fit perfectly with stimulants since they have a strong emotional effect that can lead to positive personal and interpersonal changes. It has shown a lot of promise in psychotherapy, especially in the treatment of PTSD. In recreational settings, MDMA is often associated with music events, particularly those revolving around EDM. While it can be considered a club drug, it's also used at regular house parties, in small social gatherings, and with friends or partners. Adulterants are a significant issue in the MDMA market, so drug checking is very important. As always, there will be more information and links to references on thedrugclassroom.com, which you can find using the link below. Among its positive effects are euphoria, increased empathy, pro-social behavior, a sense of well-being, stimulation, personal insight, anxiety reduction, and music enhancement. The negatives can include jaw clenching, appetite reduction, dry mouth, sweating, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, muscle tension, impaired balance, anxiety, inappropriate behavior, and a greater sensitivity to the cold. MDMA lends itself to a range of different uses. It can be used in recreational settings for music enhancement, stimulation, and pro-social effects, in interpersonal settings with a friend, partner, or small group, in therapy settings, or even by yourself. Based on how the drug is being used, the setting will vary from a massive EDM festival to a calm indoor or outdoor environment. MDMA primarily leads to a better mood, euphoria, feelings of love, self-acceptance, greater extroversion, and increased self-confidence. People often find themselves not just feeling happier, but feeling at ease in the world and pleased with anyone they're surrounded by. It tends to break down the inhibitions that stand in the way of communication, acceptance, and appreciation. Part of its pro-social action comes from decreasing defensiveness, which can facilitate connection. It's pretty common for people to feel like they have an instant connection with anyone they talk to. The relaxed, carefree, and sociable mental state that's created by MDMA is a bit different from other stimulants. Not many drugs reliably promote acceptance and compassion for the self and others. Even MDMA doesn't always lead to this effect, but it's relatively common. Although tiredness is typically reduced on the drug, it's often not as clearly stimulating as amphetamine or methamphetamine. In fact, it's common to feel calm on the drug. How MDMA impacts your energy and activity level will partly depend on your environment and intention. The drug doesn't lead to true hallucinations, and it doesn't even approach psychedelics in terms of perceptual effects. There can be some slight visual and auditory changes, but that's about it. Among those changes are increased brightness, color alteration, and seeing things as closer or further away. Depending on the dose, your vision may vibrate due to your eyes moving in an uncontrolled manner. There can also be some blurriness and a softness applied to your vision. Increased or enhanced tactile sensation is frequently present. Many users report a tingling or fuzzy sensation around their body, which tends to be pleasurable. If you're listening to music, significant music enhancement is common. Along with altering your perception, MDMA can change the meaning and significance of the things you perceive. Everything I've described so far is quite positive, but MDMA isn't free from negatives. It's typically anxiolytic, but it can also increase anxiety, and a tiny portion of people will sometimes have a panic reaction. These feelings are sometimes due to a concern or hesitation about losing control. MDMA can also cause racing thoughts, which can contribute to anxiety. If you're experiencing anxiety or panic, dysphoria could be present rather than euphoria. Psychomotor impairment and transient memory impairment are pretty common, but they typically don't get in the way of an otherwise positive experience. Mild derealization and depersonalization, such as feeling like you or the world has changed, isn't real, or is distant, can occur. Physically, MDMA increases blood pressure and heart rate. Those effects peak at 1 to 2 hours and disappear within about 6 hours. Most people won't be negatively affected by those cardiovascular changes, but a very high activity level, especially when coupled with a high dose or pre-existing vulnerability, could be dangerous. MDMA can inherently increase temperature, but this effect is mild in calm settings with common doses. You need to take breaks and focus on using a common dose if you're going to be active on the drug. Jaw clenching is quite common, so a lot of people chew gum while on the drug. Muscle tension and aches can also appear, which sometimes leads to some lower back pain or neck pain. This is more common in recreational settings, and many people also report difficulty urinating. During the initial come down, some people feel a bit scatterbrained, their energy may be lower than usual, and they could be prone to anxiety. If you take a common dose and don't overexert yourself, the come down may be minimal, or it could even be pleasant. While in other settings, some people report feeling exhausted and very depleted. The after effects of MDMA receive a lot of attention, but they're not as reliable as some people suggest. Their severity will depend on factors like your setting, your general health, sleep deprivation, and how much you used. Some people report 1 to 3 days of low mood, insomnia, anhedonia, irritability, decreased alertness, fatigue, and decreased appetite. Yet when MDMA is given in controlled settings, such as for therapy, these effects are usually absent or relatively minor. Your dose and environment are very important factors when it comes to experiencing harsh after effects or not. Since the 1970s, people have noticed MDMA can be helpful in psychotherapy. Compared to psychedelics, it has some useful qualities. It has a short duration, relatively mild activity, and minimal perceptual or thought distortion effects. Though, both MDMA and psychedelics could be useful in therapy. The substance might be helpful when treating PTSD, anxiety, depression, addiction, and other conditions. That activity is associated with its release of serotonin, increased oxytocin, promotion of BDNF, increased norepinephrine, and other pharmacological effects. It seems to strengthen the therapeutic alliance and improve the outcome of therapy sessions. This has been formally studied in the context of PTSD, with the studies showing positive results. When it works, just 2 to 3 sessions can yield benefits that persist for months and even years. MDMA lasts for 3 to 5 hours when taken orally. It has an onset of 30 to 60 minutes. MDMA is a substituted phenethylamine and amphetamine. It has structural similarities to methamphetamine, amphetamine, and mescaline. Compared to methamphetamine, the structural differences in MDMA lead to greater serotonin effects and lower dopamine effects. The drug is used as a combo of its R and S isomers. Both are active, but S-MDMA is more potent. The core effect of the drug involves the transporter-mediated release of monoamines and the subsequent activation of their receptors. It also functions as a reuptake inhibitor. MDMA's greatest effect is on serotonin, but norepinephrine also plays a moderate role, and dopamine is a minor contributor. An increase in serotonergic activity provides the bulk of the subjective effects, while norepinephrine can contribute to the cardiostimulant and psychostimulant effects. It also seems to have an action at the vesicles in the intracellular space, leading to more serotonin in the cytosol. This further contributes to the rise in serotonin activity. Most of the global brain effects, including actions on other neurotransmitter systems, likely come indirectly from monoamine release. We can see the importance of serotonin release by looking at the effect of pre-administering an SSRI. Whichever effects are reduced by the SSRI likely come from MDMA's release of serotonin. In studies where this has been done, the SSRI significantly reduces the overall effects, including subjective effects, pupil dilation, and cardiovascular activity. While serotonin isn't the only factor, it is definitely important. On top of releasing monoamines, there are some other actions. It can directly act upon serotonin receptors. There may be some adrenergic agonism, though there's at least indirect actions. On the endocrine level, MDMA can increase prolactin, cortisol, oxytocin, vasopressin, and adrenocorticotropic hormone. Temperature and activity levels can change the degree to which some of these hormones increase. These hormones contribute to other actions, both positive and negative, of MDMA. Oxytocin, for example, seems to be connected to its pro-social activity. The half-life of MDMA is 7 to 9 hours. The main active metabolite that's produced is MDA, but it's only a minor metabolite and relatively little is generated. Some of the metabolites of MDMA could lead to negative effects on the brain with chronic use, and the formation of various metabolites will vary between individuals due to genetic differences in the CYP2D6 and CoMT enzymes. Because MDMA inhibits its own metabolism, large initial doses or redoses will display nonlinear pharmacokinetics. This means MDMA levels increase from those large or subsequent doses more than you'd expect with linear kinetics. A light dose is 75 to 100 milligrams, a common dose is 100 to 150 milligrams, and a strong dose is 150 to 175 milligrams. When taken in tablet form, the average user takes 1 to 4 tablets. On average, those will contain 75 to 125 milligrams, and they've historically contained 100 milligrams or less. But there are sometimes tablets with 200 and even 300 milligrams, so taking 4 tablets over the course of a night isn't wise. Redosing is pretty common in recreational settings, though I discourage it. At most, it should be taken one more time, with half of the original dose being used around 2 hours later. MDMA was first synthesized at Merck by Anton Kalisch in 1912. Although a lot of reports claimed it was made as a weight loss pill or psychotherapy aid, that's not correct. It was created as a precursor to a hemostatic substance called methylhydrastonine. One of the syntheses for that substance involved MDMA. Based on documents from 1912, the drug was referred to as methylphenethylamine. There's no indication MDMA was tested at that time. Merck again worked with the drug in 1927. Dr. Max Oberlin was interested in epinephrine and ephedrine-like substances that'd be based on safrole. While the first pharmacological tests were completed at this time, Merck didn't move forward with the research. Another chemist, Dr. Albert van Schuer, conducted some simple toxicological tests in 1952. The first in-depth, formal animal study occurred in the 1950s. It was sponsored by the U.S. Army's Chemical Center and conducted at the University of Michigan. MDMA was given to 5 species: guinea pigs, monkeys, mice, rats, and dogs. It was found to be less toxic than MDA, but more toxic than mescaline. No human experimentation was reported, though it's possible the Army was interested in potentially using it as a chemical incapacitant or interrogation aid. Yet another Merck chemist, Dr. Wolfgang Frühstofer, worked with MDMA and similar substances in 1959. There were no reports of human use. The first regular scientific paper mentioning MDMA was published in Polish in 1960, and it described the drug synthesis. By the late 1960s, use may have begun, and it seemed to clearly begin by 1970, when the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs reported its presence on the street in Chicago. A key figure in the history of MDMA is Alexander Shulgin. He worked with substances like MDA and MMDA before exploring MDMA. He first synthesized MDMA in 1965, but it was then set aside until the 1970s. Shulgin sent a letter containing information about its synthesis to another chemist who was seemingly interested in making the drug. That information was reportedly passed on to people in the Midwest around 1970. It's possible that that communication enabled MDMA to reach the street at that time. Before he personally tried it, Shulgin encountered multiple people who claimed to have used it. Some emphasized its stimulant effects, others emphasized its emotional effects. He then began his own dose escalation test in September 1976. September 8th, 16 milligrams with no effect. September 9th, 25 milligrams with no effect. September 12th, 40 milligrams with no effect. September 17th, 60 milligrams with no effect. And then on September 27th, he took 81 milligrams and received a fairly light altered state for under 3 hours. More effects were gained from 100 milligrams, which was first tested on October 5th. By 1977, Shulgin introduced MDMA to Leo Zeff, a retired psychologist in California. Zeff was impressed by the effects, and he ended up sharing information about the drug with many other people. Shulgin and Zeff contributed in a significant way to the spread of MDMA for therapeutic use. Within a matter of months, it was present on both the West and East Coast. Because of their work in this area, Shulgin has been called the godfather of ecstasy, while Zeff is sometimes referred to as the Johnny Appleseed of MDMA. Along with David Nichols, Shulgin published a paper about its effects in humans in 1978. They gave this description of its activity. Qualitatively, the drug appears to evoke an easily controlled altered state of consciousness with emotional and sensual overtones. It can be compared in its effects to marijuana, to psilocybin devoid of the hallucinatory component, or to low levels of MDA. When MDMA was being used in therapeutic and personal growth settings in the mid to late 1970s, it was often referred to as ADAM. It was found to increase acceptance of self and others, increase tolerance to emotionally difficult material, and it could help people address issues without severe disorientation. Some people likened it to a penicillin for the soul. Formal studies were not conducted, but over 100,000 doses were reportedly given to thousands of people. One of the first papers about its effects in dozens of people was published by George Greer in the early 1980s. That paper indicated it could offer psychological benefits at 75 to 150 milligrams. One of the first promotional mentions of MDMA was in an underground magazine called Wet in 1981. The name Ecstasy showed up in the magazine, though the exact origin of the name isn't clear. Between the late 1970s and early 1980s, MDMA expanded beyond the therapeutic community. It became a popular member of the drug market, at which point public knowledge about the drug increased. The drug had an especially notable following in the Dallas and Austin areas of Texas. Rick Doblin, who would go on to form MAPS, learned about MDMA's therapeutic use in 1982. Just a short time later, the DEA became focused on getting rid of the drug. With the help of others, Doblin started the Earth Metabolic Design Lab. The EMDL hoped to coordinate a response against the DEA's attempt to criminalize MDMA. The DEA first filed its intent to prohibit the substance in 1984. Although it didn't expect there to be much of a public response, the EMDL and others were ready to fight back. Papers were filed to request a hearing on the matter, and in December 1984, the government announced a hearing would take place. During those proceedings, the government heard testimony from individuals like George Greer, David Nichols, Lester Grinspoon, and Rick Strassman. They argued against it being illegal, especially in Schedule 1. They testified that it did have medical applications, that more research was needed, and that it was distinct from amphetamine or hallucinogens. On the opposing side were arguments that MDMA was similar to MDA, that trafficking was already an issue, and that it was a dangerous drug. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist, argued that it should be placed in Schedule 1. He noted that street use escalated from an estimated 10,000 doses distributed in all of 1976 to 30,000 doses distributed per month in 1985. As these arguments were being heard, the DEA moved forward with Schedule 1 status and emergency scheduled the drug in July 1985. After hearing all of the testimony, the administrative law judge in the case, Francis Young, decided in 1986 that MDMA should be a Schedule 3 substance. The DEA didn't agree, and it continued to pursue Schedule 1 status. This led to a legal fight between the EMDL and the DEA. Victories were obtained on both sides, but the DEA ultimately won, leading to a permanent Schedule 1 status for MDMA. Around this time, a lot of attention was being given to MDMA, especially its alleged harms. A post in the APA Monitor said, "Repeated use of designer drugs, such as ecstasy, produces potentially irreversible brain damage," and Charles Schuster was quoted in the Associated Press as saying, "It can poison the nervous system, probably irreversibly. It may very well be that a young, healthy adult who is exposed to these drugs is not going to show frank symptoms that are going to be picked up by a clinician. But what we don't know is whether 20 or 30 years from now, at the age of 45, they may begin to be showing central nervous system degenerative signs that ordinarily would not be seen until they get to be 70 or 80. Despite being made illegal in the 1980s, recreational use definitely didn't go away. Rather, it appeared to increase by the 1990s. Rick Doblin also responded to the drug's prohibition by forming MAPS, which to this day is working to make drugs like MDMA available for medical use. The 1990s saw widespread MDMA use and a significant issue with adulterants, which led to massive fluctuations in purity. There was a further increase in recreational use around the year 2000, which coincided with more seizures of the drug. According to Customs, 750,000 pills were seized in 1998, and that jumped to 9.3 million by 2000. The rate of high school seniors who said it was fairly or very easy to get MDMA grew from 38% to 51% between 1998 and 2000, and emergency room visits also increased, often due to overconsumption of water and adulterated drugs. 11.7% of high school seniors reported having used ecstasy by 2001, up from 8% in 1999. In response, there were many alarmist messages from the media and government. NIDA spent $54 million on a club drugs initiative, with that money going towards research, preventative education, and community alert bulletins. NIDA referred to the use of MDMA as an epidemic in 2000. Some of the headlines included the poisoning of suburbia in Ceylon, too high a price in the Reporter, and the dangers of being young, hip, and high in the U.S. News and World Report. 60 Minutes ran an alarmist piece that included statements suggesting MDMA was as dangerous as crack cocaine and heroin, and the host, Vicky Mabry, referred to it as one of the most dangerous drugs. Although some more reasonable pieces were also published at this time, the messaging was quite negative. Television programs and articles attacking the use of MDMA affected the way many people in the public viewed the drug. In July 2000, the DEA held a conference called Ecstasy and Club Drugs, Dancing with Darkness. You can tell just from the title how the conference went. Richard Fiano, the DEA's chief of operations, said, "Every city in the US has experienced some rise in ecstasy use over the last several years. The kids believe that ecstasy is safe, they enjoy the rave experience. But actually what is happening is that over the next couple of days after taking ecstasy, their brain cells are actually being programmed to die." And David Galvin, a DEA pharmacologist, commented, "Lately, raves are just a venue for drug purchases. They are no more than analogous to a crack house in which you go, buy the drug, and go out the back door." Around this time, it was clear that adulterants were an issue. DXM and caffeine were showing up in a large portion of MDMA products, along with MDA, MDE, and methamphetamine. During the 2000s, the market moved towards a low point in purity around 2009. Among the adulterants were cathinones and piperazines, and occasionally drugs like PMA and PMMA, which are even more concerning, have been an issue. This is why drug checking is so vital. The market rebounded in the 2010s, especially in Europe. That change coincided with the appearance of a higher average dose per tablet and the appearance of very high dose tablets that could be dangerous. Those issues were and continue to be more prevalent in Europe. While recreational use continued to take place in the 2000s, MAPS was finally able to begin phase 2 clinical research in the US. Studies examining MDMA-assisted psychotherapy found it could be helpful in the treatment of PTSD. In 2011, in the US, it was indicated that 14.5 million people had used MDMA at least once, and 2.4 million used it in the last year. Based on those stats, MDMA is one of the more common illicit drugs. Currently, organizations like DanceSafe, Bunk Police, Ecstasy Data, and Energy Control are trying to make MDMA safer, especially in the area of drug checking. MDMA is being sold in various forms, including capsules, tablets, crystals, and powder. Hundreds of designs and colors exist for the tablets. Even among those with the same design, the composition of tablets can vary. There's a particularly high rate of MDMA use among those who go to nightclubs and festivals. There's also a bit of use in other more relaxed settings. MAPS's research has continued to progress, and the FDA has allowed it to move forward. At this rate, it appears MDMA could be legal for psychotherapy by the early 2020s. MDMA is Schedule 1 in the US, and it's generally illegal everywhere else. MDMA can clearly cause significant health problems, and it can even cause fatalities, but nearly all of its harms can be avoided or drastically reduced. We have to approach the topic of safety by recognizing that if someone takes a common dose in a calm environment, there will almost never be an issue for an otherwise healthy person. Therefore, the key is to control every possible factor to keep the drug safe. While death is pretty uncommon, hospital visits from acute overdoses do happen fairly often. They can involve symptoms like agitation, headache, disorientation, hypertension, and sweating. If the case is really severe, there could be loss of consciousness, seizures, severe hyperthermia, rhabdomyolysis, renal failure, hyponatremia, and brain edema. Overdoses and bad environmental conditions can work together to cause brain, cardiovascular, liver, and kidney toxicity. Fatalities often stem from cardiovascular problems, hyperthermia, and hyponatremia, a low serum sodium level. You can also end up with serotonin syndrome with very high doses or combinations with drugs like MAOIs. If possible, you should use MDMA in a calm setting that's not too hot. If this is not possible, it's very important to only use a common dose and to take breaks every so often. While it's good to drink water, you don't need a massive amount. Drinking too much can further increase the risk of hyponatremia, which can be dangerous and even deadly. Long-term after effects due to neuroadaptations and potentially neurotoxicity might be possible. Those lasting problems include depression, cognitive impairment, and an altered response to stress. However, this is mainly a risk if you're excessively using MDMA and taking high doses. To minimize your risk, you should avoid taking it more than every 3 months. That isn't a scientific recommendation, but it's a good general guideline. Some of the risky combinations that should be avoided are MAOIs, 5-HTP, stimulants, tramadol, and DXM. More information is available on the Drug Classroom website using the link below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. The Drug Classroom is exclusively funded by donations. If you want to support, please do so on patreon.com/thedrugclassroom.